Hi! If you landed here, chances are you're trying to decide between the Syntakt or the Digitone. In this video, I'm going to give you the overview of the key differences between the two, as well as talk about the respective pros and cons to help you decide which one is ultimately right for you. I'll be comparing the Syntakt and the Digitone from my personal perspective of currently owning the Syntakt and kind of wishing I never sold the Digitone. In other words, I only have one of these synths in front of me, but I've used both extensively and I think I can speak to their pros and cons anyway. Unfortunately, I only have one camera, so I can only show this device. It was between this little fellow and my face, and that was a pretty easy choice. All right, so let's get started. At the surface level, both of these devices can be described as a bit of a synthesizer and a bit of a drum machine at the same time. But there are a few key differences between the two, and that's going to be the focus of this video. So these are the main pros of each device, and those are also the chapters in this video. So first I'll talk about the 5 main pros of the Syntakt, and then I'll talk about the 4 pros of the Digitone. Let's start with the sound palette. When it comes to the range of synth sounds available, the Syntakt can be thought of as a bit of a smörgåsbord, which is Swedish for smorgasbord, which actually literally means butter goose table. Whatever that means, you know, but in this case it means that it's not particularly specialized. The Syntakt instead offers a bit more variety in sounds. So the Syntakt organizes itself in what it calls machines, which is really just marketing speech for simple and pre-configured synth macros, if you will. So you have things like, let me show you an example. This is the kick machine, and then you have another track, which is, this is a snare. It's the same thing here. Like, let's say you want to have a shorter tail. You can tighten that up, and you maybe want to change the timbre of it to something else, tune it, and so on. Maybe a little bit of overdrive. It's really simple to just dial in the sound that you want here. On first glance, and certainly if you watch a lot of the early reviews and jams on the Syntakt, it would appear as if the sound palette on the Syntakt is a bit limited. Many people, including myself, compared it against the model Cycles, which is at its core a fairly simple FM synthesizer. And it has a very distinct sound that you either like or you don't like. To be honest, if I made this comparison video just a couple of weeks ago, this would have been a pro of the Digitone instead of the Syntakt. But as of the latest firmware update, version 1.2, I would say that the Syntakt now has a wider sound palette than the Digitone, particularly through its new Swarm and Raw machines. So I'll give you an example of the Swarm machine. So this is basically sawtooth oscillator. So what this does is basically you can dial in some detuning, which makes it sound radically different from just the sawtooth, which is more like this, I suppose. So this is one example of the type of sound that you can't make this sound on the Digitone, period. In comparison, the Digitone is quote-unquote just an FM synthesizer. It's a fairly complex and deep FM synthesizer in my opinion, especially compared to the Syntakt. And it makes it a little bit more of a sound designer's kind of device. But the bottom line here is that the Syntakt offers a bit more of the bread and butter type of synth sounds, like maybe more classic subtractive synth sounds, whereas the Digitone is a more specialized but deep FM synth. Now let's talk about tracks. So this is an area where the Syntakt clearly wins. The Syntakt has 12 tracks, whereas the Digitone only has 4. So this means that on the Syntakt you have 1 track for kicks, for example, 1 for snare, 1 for hi-hats, 1 for ride here, you have the bass here, lead here or whatever. Like you never run out of tracks on the Syntakt in my opinion. Like it's really simple to build up a full track. There's one catch though. Every track on the Syntakt is monophonic. And this means that you can only play 1 note at a time per track. So this is the bass. Maybe bass is a bad example because you kind of don't want to play 2 notes at the same time anyway, but let's say I wanted to strike a chord here. This is not possible. On the Digitone, you can do this. You have Polyphony. So that means that although the Digitone only has 4 tracks, each track can use up all of the 8 voices of Polyphony if you want. So you can play a chord with 3 notes playing at the same time, and that would use up 3 of the 8 voices that you have at your disposal on the Digitone. Now, you could, if you wanted to, you could copy the sound from one track to the other. Like, I'll just dial in another tone, another note here. So you get the point. You can play different notes at the same time on the Syntakt as well. But to program chords like this, you would really have to love step sequencing to enjoy this type of workflow. So just to be clear, there is a chords machine on the Syntakt, but it has a very distinct workflow to define a chord. And no matter how I dial it in, I can't get it to sound close to the fullness of a proper chord on a Digitone or any other polysynth for that matter. So if all you want is just a sort of a sine wave chord with a few limited overtones, I'd say this works. But if you want a more distinct sound, this just isn't cutting it. So let me give you an example. Here's I don't even know the names of these different chords, but this would be the major chord. Point here is, if you want to build harmony on the Syntakt, this is what you have to work with. So let's talk about analog versus digital. So this is one of those obvious things that you either care a ton about or you couldn't care less about. The Syntakt has 4 analog oscillators. So yeah, let me show you. So this track number 9, 10, 11, 12, those are analog tracks. So this is an analog snare. You can dial in the machine and you can create some very specific, analog sounding snares, if you're into that. I personally don't care all that much about analog versus digital. To me, the value here is that they offer just a bit more variety of sound. And some of the bass sounds can sound really gritty. I'll show you an example of that too. In addition to the analog oscillators, the Syntakt also has an analog effect block. Now this is a pretty cool thing in my opinion. It can even be sequenced, so you can use it in fairly creative ways. The classical example that I've seen in other tutorials is to just use this as a ducker for the kick, for that pumping sidechain compression type of sound. But I think there are more interesting uses than that. So I'll show you one example that I used for my previous song that I call Changes. I'll link to the jam up here so you can check it out. So what I've done is I routed only the reverb. So you can route any number of tracks into this effect block, but in this case I've only routed the reverb, so that's it. And what I've done then is I have, so if I play this right now, it just sounds like this. So I have a very long reverb tail and it kind of just blurs everything out. That's not the sound that I'm after. So what I did is I went into the step sequencer of the effect block and I put in some trigs where I modified the volume of the whole effect block in itself. So what I'm doing is basically I'm putting a trig on the first step and I'm dialing down the volume down, and now I'm doing the same on the third chord note. And then on the second and the fourth chord note, I'm cranking the volume up to the max, and that sounds like this. And that was basically the thing that made that song happen. Like this effect block and the way that I used this creatively was what inspired me to make that song. So I have only scratched the surface of it. I'm really interested in diving much deeper in it. So at its core, the analog effect block has a filter and an overdrive. And this is one of the reasons why I say that the Syntakt has a wider sound palette than the Digitone, because this thing can sound pretty gritty and distorted in a way that I don't think that the Digitone can quite approach. For example, I've never heard a Digitone sound like this. And whether you like that type of sound or not, it's up to you. But to me, like that tickles me in a way that FM synthesis just doesn't. Let's talk about immediacy. This is the final pro of the Syntakt over the Digitone. And you can think of this as a consequence of the other pros. So first of all, because of the design concept of machines, Dialing in the sound you want for a song is really quick. On the Digitone, if you wanted a good sounding kick, for example, you basically have two options. Either you pick from one of the many kick presets on the Digitone, and to be honest, there are many good presets there. I've actually sampled some of them and I use them in other songs all the time because I just love those kicks. But that's your one option. The other option is to learn and get really good at FM synthesis and watch tutorials and try to design your own kicks from scratch. Whereas on the Syntakt, you just pick one of the kick machines and you tweak it to suit the style of your music. So let's give you an example. I have this pattern going here from my previous song. And let's take away the other drums. So I think, I'm not an expert, I'm not a sound design snob at all, but I know that it's important that the kick kind of goes well with the bass. And in this case, the bass is kind of pumping all the time, like it's playing all the time. And so the kick should probably be a little bit tighter because it has a very long tail. It's a pretty long kick. So what I would do then, on the Syntakt is I'll just take down the decay a little bit like that. But that took away a lot of the energy from the sound. So probably want to dial down the tuning, just get it to thump a little bit more. And then because even the bass uses a lot of mid frequencies, I want to have a bit more of a transient, just to get it to sort of cut through the mix a little bit better. So maybe something like that. So let's hear how that sounds. Yeah, so that's more like it. This sort of fits with the groove a lot better. So that's just one example. Like, this is so simple. And just to be clear, most of the time I make music by just getting inspired by a preset sound, and I think that's a perfectly acceptable way of writing music. The point here, though, is that if you're not happy with that preset, you will find yourself having to work a lot harder to get the things to sound the way you want on the Digitone compared to the Syntakt. But this may not be a con for you, though, because if you're interested in sound design and you love exploring synths deeply, and particularly FM synthesis, the Digitone is a really fun device to explore. Now let's talk a little bit about the clear pros of the Digitone instead. So you could sort of think of this as the in reverse. This is the list of obvious cons of the Syntakt. By far the most distinctive feature on the Digitone, in contrast to the painful omission of the Syntakt, is the polyphony. The Digitone is an 8-voice synthesizer. Like I said, it has only 4 tracks, but all of those 8 voices can be shared dynamically across those tracks. This means that you can play a full chord on the Digitone and record that into the step sequencer of one single track. So if you're a harmony type of music composer that enjoy playing chords and pads and things like that, this could be a deal breaker for you. And personally, this is the thing that I miss the most on my Syntakt, and the reason why I still kind of regret selling my Digitone. I really wish that Elektron would copy over the voice sharing and stealing logic of the Digitone into the Syntakt. I think it would open up so many possibilities of the Syntakt. Now let's talk about the Arpeggiator of the Digitone. This ARP is probably the best one I've ever used on any hardware synthesizer. To me, an ARP is really important when noodling on a song idea or just as a general source of inspiration. It can really help you stumble over happy accidents. And I mean, don't get me wrong, you can use this to ARP manually if you want, But it's not the same thing as having this play for you. Like, you just hold down the note and the Digitone would start to play in whatever pattern you want. It's super inspiring. So let's talk about FM synthesis. At its core, the Digitone is a 4-operator FM synth. I won't go into the details of FM synthesis here, but in comparison, the machines on the Syntakt are more like 2-operator FM synths, and that means that the sounds that the Syntakt can generate are a little bit more limited compared to the Digitone. Not as complex sounding, not as rich sounding. I'll link to an example of the kinds of sounds that Digitone can generate in the description so you can hear for yourself. Unfortunately, again, I don't have a Digitone in front of me. I sold mine, I regret it, but it is what it is. Now, to be clear, FM synthesis isn't your bread and butter type of synthesis. I think it's fair to say that it's an acquired taste. I personally love the sound of it because you can make it both sound sort of retro 80s and 90s and modern at the same time. And I wish the Syntakt could go a little bit deeper into FM synthesis to better match the Digitone sound palette. But, only you can decide for yourself if you like this sound or not. And, because the thing about the Digitone is that FM synthesis is pretty much the sound you get. So for example, if you want something more like a proper subtractive pulse width modulation, the Digitone won't be for you, but the Syntakt possibly would. So here's an example of that. So this is the, what's it called, a Psy bits machine. And this is the sine wave. If I dial in a square wave, so this is like, this is what's known as a pulse. Sounds like a pulse, but if you modulate the width of this pulse, it sounds like this. To some ears, that's pretty pleasing. So you can modulate that automatically by just assigning the synth wave shape to an LFO, and it sounds like this. And that's hard not to love, right? So that's an example of a sound that you can't make on the Digitone. Now let's talk about the final pro of the Digitone. It's the chorus effect. So both Syntakt and Digitone has a delay and a reverb, but the Digitone also has a chorus effect. This is where I really wish that I had a Digitone in front of me so I could demonstrate it for you, but all I can say is that it adds stereo width and a bit of warmth and fullness to the sounds, and that makes a real difference, especially I'd say when you're working with some of the harshness of the FM tones. So the Syntakt will really benefit from having this effect too, and that makes that my third feature request on the Syntakt. So, which one is the winner here? Well, this is the part that surprised me at least. By the way, if you find this comparison helpful, I would really appreciate if you hit that like button, and now would be a good time to do it. When I saw the first promotional video about the Syntakt earlier this year, I had to struggle to not press the buy button right away. On paper, this was the perfect groovebox for me. Drums and melody in full fusion is what they wrote. And yeah, the music in that video just spoke to me too. But then as I was watching the first overviews and reviews of it, my appetite frankly cooled off significantly because I just couldn't help but thinking that it sounded like a Model Cycles. But then I finally got the Syntakt anyway a couple of months ago, just because I got it secondhand. It was a really good price. I just couldn't say no to it. But you can tell that I'm still sort of on the fence. I still have this plastic cover still on it. I don't know if, should I peel it off or not? And once I started to play on it, I again confirmed to myself that no, there just isn't any sound in here that I absolutely love. But then I didn't just buy it because of the sounds. I bought it because of the Elektron sequencer. So I started to make a track, and then I made another one, and I made a third one. And before I knew it, Elektron released firmware version 1.2 for the Syntakt that introduced 2 new synth machines. And now I can definitely say that it sounds way more than just the Model Cycles. And by the way, don't get me wrong, there's nothing bad about the Model Cycles at all. I just personally found the sound palette to be a little bit too limited for my taste. And so I don't personally appreciate its tonal qualities as much as I appreciate the sound of, let's say, a class of analog subtractive synth. So this is pure personal taste, and you may have an opposite opinion, and that's totally cool with me. But anyway, so as a Syntakt owner, I still really miss the Polyphony. I miss the Arpeggiator of the Digitone. I miss the chorus of the Digitone. But I have to say, the Syntakt is equally an incredibly fun and creative multi-timbral synthesizer / groovebox, and honestly, I think I'm gonna hold on to this one. So which one wins for you though? It really depends on what things you value the most. If you always use chords and arps in your songwriting, then I think you would probably agree with me that the Syntakt leaves something to be desired, and you may find yourself gravitate more towards the Digitone instead. I also think it depends on what kind of genres of music you're interested in. I'd say that the Syntakt lends itself to a bit more drum-centric music, like techno, IDM, things like that. Whereas if you make, let's say, ambient music, where drums are secondary to the melody, I think you would probably be happier with the Digitone. And it's not like the Digitone can't sound really gritty and percussive on its own, it's just that you're basically confined to programming all of the drum sounds in one single track. That doesn't mean that you can only have one sound, by the way. You can sound lock, and you can certainly program really, really complex drums in just one track. But the point is that it's more programmatic. It's, I would say that it's less fun than programming drums on the Syntakt. On the Syntakt, on the other hand, it's much more straightforward because you can have one track for the kick, another one for the snare, another one for the hats, and so on. So it just makes it faster and easier to program it, but it also makes it easier to perform on it. Like, let's say I'm playing this pattern from my song. I can quickly just mute the drums, like that, take away the kick, and I don't know, maybe I take away the bass and I introduce the drums again. I can do that from this one single pattern, whereas on the Digitone, I would have to maintain separate patterns for different levels of drum energy, and you know, it's doable, but it's not as fun. In the end, I couldn't pick a definitive winner between the two. For me, they're both winners, and they're both great standalone grooveboxes and synthesizers. And they can both function as part of a larger setup if you're into that. Because of my workflow of jamming on this thing in my lap and using headphones and nothing else plugged into it, I think I'm pretty happy with just the Syntakt for now. But with that said, I will be honest, I have an alert for secondhand Digitones, and I may jump at the next opportunity to evaluate once again live. Anyway, I hope that was helpful to you, and if you're out there trying to pick between one of the two, hopefully this gave you some guidance. Definitely let us know in the comments which one you prefer. I'd love to hear what features you value the most out of these devices and kind of what your decision process looks like in the end. And if you think this video was helpful, it would really help me if you hit that like button. If you want to see more of these type of videos, then be sure to hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments what kind of videos you'd like to see more of. With all that said, thank you so much for watching this video. Have a great day and week, and I hope to catch you in the next one.